Hello and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the show where I interview the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help educate, motivate, and inspire others to make the world a better place. Today, it's a very, very special edition of Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast, as I am joined by the wonderful Desiree Barnes, a native of Buffalo, New York, who served as communications and public engagement strategist for former US President Barack Obama. During her decade-long tenure with the Obamas, she was a member of the communications team, where she oversaw daily operations and message execution as advisor to the press secretary, Josh Earnest. Concluding the administration, Desiree joined the personal office of Obamas to craft post-presidency messaging and public engagement. Desiree is the founder of BRKDN Strategies, a strategic communications consulting firm for contemporary artists and scaling startups. She enjoys trap music with her yoga practice, ramen as food group, and documenting it all on her Instagram story. Welcome to the show today, Desiree.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I have to say that both I and the team have been really excited to have you on today. I think given that a lot of the podcasts so far have been with individuals and business leaders from the UK, we're so excited because we obviously watch, with bated breath a lot of the time, what's happening with the American and also British kind of economy and government. And so, for us to have you here with us today, we are so very, very excited.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to apologize to your listeners now. It's about 5 a.m. here. I'm traveling from Phoenix back to New York. And so at times when you're talking, I'll put the phone on mute so folks don't have to deal with airport background noise. So I'm happy to be here, though.
Oh, bless you. And oh my goodness, I can't believe it's so early over there. It sounds like you're a really early riser from what you've said before. And I bet with your career, you've had a lot of early mornings and very, very late nights, haven't you?
Oh, absolutely. So I'm used to the early mornings and late nights. It's just, I like to tell people now I'm retired. So the Republic will still stand, as some of my old colleagues would jokingly say when we were in the White House, that now everything is not necessarily a national security matter or a world crisis. So when I have to be up early, I would love to sit here and pretend that I was, one of those managers or leaders who's an early riser and is up by 5 every day and is on the treadmill and has already read 3 papers and then has hit the office. It really is, I try and build my personal routine about 2 hours out from whatever the first thing for my day is. But I do like getting up early to work out. And I tell my colleagues and even now clients that I work with in the mornings, when I wake up, I'm like, I still haven't had my conversation with the Lord yet. So I don't talk to anyone before it. And that's basically me jokingly saying like, oh yeah, I like to meditate in the morning, but really it's just, I am not a morning person. My customer service hours don't start that early. So I won't even sit here and pretend to be the next executive who's keeping a strict schedule at the top of the morning.
And tell me a little bit about, other than being up at the absolute crack of dawn and obviously doing the yoga and managing a lot of your clients at the minute, what else are you up to right now? What are the kind of key projects that you're working on at the moment, Desiree?
So I left the White House in 2016. I stayed with President Obama after the White House as well. And I know you read over my bio, but shortly after I left working with President Obama, which will be a little over a year ago, I started to help with the announcing of his memoirs and some of the foundation's first pieces of programming. And I wanted to do something different. I wanted to leave DC. For those of your listeners who don't know, in the US, DC is very politics focused, and that's the main source of business and social currency there. And so I'm from New York originally, and I'm sure if any of your listeners have visited New York, there's no place like it. And I just wanted to go home. And so I knew I wanted to explore going into the creative arts in some way. In my mind, I probably would have been a starving artist or some type of writer full time if I hadn't gone into politics. And that would be my dream job. And my father died shortly after leaving the personal office. So I took about 6 months to.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Thank you. I took about 6 months to handle his estate, which was in a completely different state. So closing out his affairs and dealing with some family matters and just grieve and travel a bit and kind of recalibrate and be very intentional about whatever my next step was going to be. Starting BRKDN, which is just an acronym for Breakdown Strategies, that really was born out of former people that I had worked with or prospective new clients had reached out to me for consulting matters. And I knew I couldn't commit to going in-house anywhere. And I decided to consult. And I will say that if any of your listeners are thinking about going off on their own doing freelance, whether they're a writer or whether they are a communication strategist or some type of marketing guru, it's extremely scary to go out on your own because, at least in the US, your employer provides benefits that usually are the appealing reason why you take the job, from healthcare to, we call it a 401k here, but that would be a retirement plan, as well as if you're at a startup or a publicly traded company, stock options at times can be offered. So it's really financially scary. It's really emotionally scary because you have to be self-managed and very diligent in your approach to things. But more importantly, it's like you see people who are like, I'm a consultant, and you're asking yourself, you're like, A, what does that mean? And B, how did you find your first client? Because really, fostering that relationship and figuring out how to navigate or retain your first client is one of the biggest hurdles. And so essentially for folks who wanted me to come in-house and do crisis communications for them, I decided that I wanted to consult. I would pay for my own healthcare costs. And I'm not necessarily the best self-managed, but I figured this is something that I needed to do just to try it out. And I promised myself I wouldn't go and work for anyone else unless I gave my own self a shot and to follow creative pursuits. And that is a very long-winded answer, but the last thing I'll say, which applies to the first question you had, is that Breakdown Strategies, our clients have ranged from startups who are looking to scale and engage with new demographics or who are looking to go public. I always say if you're a startup, going from being privately held to going public can sometimes be like running for public office because you have to convince investors and a lot of your consumers that you are ready to file for an IPO. And once you file for an IPO and you go public, your board members and shareholders are kind of like your constituency group. And those are the folks who are going to elect whatever strategy you think is best for the business going forward. So working with a lot of young executives or a lot of folks who have not been public facing before and giving them the tools to take their company public or handle rapid growth. Because in 2007 and 2008, when I started with President Obama, it was a campaign and it was very scrappy and grassroots. And it was kind of this like phenomenon. People had never heard of him before. And suddenly it went from being, a senator in Illinois with this crazy, name. that people weren't too familiar with, to us going to Berlin in 2008 and having millions of people show up for a U.S. senator who hadn't been even elected to office, who was just running for president. And so everything really happened overnight. And as far as the other clients that Breakdown Strategies has, I work with a lot of contemporary artists. So art is really my passion. I'm a New York kid. I went to school in New York City in the Bronx. I was obsessed with graffiti, streetwear, hip hop music. It really was very therapeutic for me growing up. And so I had the opportunity to meet a lot of artists who were currently practicing. And one of my artists, Brandon Bro, he does all of the cover art for a U.S. rapper named Chance the Rapper. And so if you look at any of Chance the Rapper's album covers or single covers, they're all done by the same person. And he's a local Chicago artist and really serves as an art director. And what I noticed is all of these artists who had become my friends had a really difficult time explaining their artwork. And so if you go to the museum, actually, one of the first ideas I got for working with artists was going to Frieze in the UK. I was crazy enough where I was like, if I can get there, I had, a cheap flight, and I went to the Frieze Art Festival there in the UK for 48 hours. I flew in just for 2 days because they had this huge Basquiat exhibit. And if you are from New York, and I know Basquiat for some art heads can get a little played out, but Basquiat was very prolific in the New York art scene, which is now called Soho. Before they were calling it just downtown, and it had his largest collection of works. That was an exhibition called Basquiat Boom for Real. And while I was there, I was working with, or just friends with, another artist named Sheldon Scott out of DC. And he was like, come by my studio and I want you to see some of the new pieces because you do such a good job explaining my work to either galleries or other people who come to see it when I show. And, and Brandon, the cover artist for Chance, had asked me, he's like, I saw some of your Instagram stories and I know you like to write. I would love to have you write for me. I'm doing a show in Singapore. Could you do some of the copywriting for me? And this is a real thing that I'm sure it goes unnoticed. But when you go into a museum and you see an explanation or the bio of an artist or an explanation of the work that you're viewing, it's done by someone. And 9 times out of 10, it may be someone from the museum that's doing it, or the artist will try to describe the work themselves. But I like to have a holistic approach because I think art should be accessible to all. And, and not all artists like to explain their work. But if you can, it's an interesting way to help an artist who is like visually able to communicate verbally to the viewer. So I know that's a very long answer, and I promise my other responses will be shorter. But Breakdown Strategies works with startups, works with artists, and also has worked with some public figures who are either dealing with crisis comms or looking to make a transition.
Oh my goodness. I don't know where to start to ask you another question, but how interesting, know, everything from kind of the breakdown strategies that you talked about from your childhood, which again, is absolutely fascinating. You've kind of really in such a short period of time really gone from, grassroots, to use your explanation, through to kind of overnight success with the Obamas, through to now utilizing all of those wonderful tools and skills that you've learned with the public and with explaining through comms, all of those different pieces, and move that into the work that you're doing now with artists to really help them almost bring themselves out of themselves and explain why they're doing what they're doing. And then I think the piece that you very kind of humbly mentioned, A, what does it mean to be a consultant? And B, how did you find your first client? To me, as an outsider looking in, immediately I'd be thinking, oh my goodness, well, look at your background. Surely you're getting demands from left, right, and center to ask for your work. And so to take that really quite scary, to use your terminology, step and leap into the unknown to then go and do something different, I think is really, really brave of you. And right now, it sounds like it's going fabulously well. I think there's a plethora of SMEs and businesses that could really benefit massively from your work with the public. And then also the pieces helping artists and creators really get their voice out. I think that is brilliant.
Thank you. I will say that the origin of the name Breakdown Strategies happened because a mentor of mine and friends really have just minded the gap. I'm an only child from a single parent household, and I didn't grow up with a lot of means, but I had a lot of opportunity. And it was born out of, I felt like I was going through a breakdown. After I lost my dad, I wasn't necessarily as close with him, and we kind of had a fraught relationship. But I think working with one company or public figure or organization for so long, people don't necessarily realize how much your identity becomes fused to whatever the work that you're working on. So during the administration and towards the end, I worked really hard to try and separate my identity, my personal identity, from the work that I did do. So I looked at the job that I had as a part of my career, but just as that, a job. And so when people would ask me, it must be so great to work for Barack Obama, it was amazing. It was a great opportunity. Barack Obama is not a manager. Barack Obama is a leader. So, I like to tell people there's a difference there. So on your day to day, Barack Obama wasn't necessarily who I reported to every single day, but very much so he is a prolific leader and I think historical figure. But I wanted to make sure people understood that he was a colleague. We worked together. There was not a friendship that was born. It wasn't until years later where you become like family and you kind of have a love-hate relationship where you accept that person's quirks. And, and if they do something wrong, you're like, hey, this person may be an asshole or may have done something wrong. And use my language, I'm very frank, but this person is my asshole and this person is my, my problem to have. So,
I love how you describe that.
Yeah.
If you don't mind me asking, because of course, I can quite imagine, as you've just said, people are always saying, oh my goodness, it must have been great to work with Barack Obama, da, 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 da. You touched there a little bit on yourself and there was a small piece of vulnerability that kind of came peeking through that I'd really love to ask you more about if you don't mind. But you mentioned that you are, you're an only child from a single parent, born out of breakdown, and the breakdown strategy, was born out of breakdown of having lost your father, in these kind of fraught relationships. Would you mind telling me a little bit more about that? Because I'm so intrigued as to your background, because obviously you've massively, to anyone looking in and all of our listeners listening, I'm sure will be thinking, oh my goodness, what a fantastic career she's had, but I'm sensing that maybe it wasn't.
Oh yeah. Oh, there's bumps, bruises. There's like, that.
Exactly. Tell me about the young Desiree growing up and how you found yourself suddenly being hurtled into the spotlight, if you will, and some of the earlier days.
Yeah. So growing up, dealing with a lot in my household, from addiction to physical abuse and to just being financially unstable. I would say when I went to college, I worked my butt off to, graduated high school at 17. I'm not sure how old most folks are there before they go on to uni, as you guys would say, but that is about 1 year earlier than most people in the US go to university. And I was 17. I was living in upstate New York, and we were kind of, or we were blue collar, but the area was a little bit more rural and suburban in comparison to living in New York City. And I stayed in state. I went to a private institution that got a little bit of a scholarship, and I just knew I needed to get out. And I was hell bent on, I'm going to go to school. I'm going to do the hardest thing that I can, and then I'll earn people's respect, and I won't feel disenfranchised anymore. So I was like, what's the thing that you can do that's like the most noble profession? What's the exact opposite of maybe you're growing up? I was like, I'm going to be a medical doctor. And so I went to college at 17. I moved to the Bronx and I studied biology and chemistry. And I was good in biology, horrible at chemistry. And at 19, I had started this med program in Connecticut for like research. I got accepted. It was for minorities. And here I was, an African American female, and I just knew, I knew that people would underestimate me, but I didn't really think about that as much until one of my deans at college said, she's like, you don't advocate for yourself enough. She's like, you've got big things that you want to do, but you need to speak up and you need to get scrappy when it comes to pursuing what it is that you want, because she could kind of tell that I could be easily discouraged. So if someone told me, like, you may not want to necessarily pursue the path of medicine, but maybe you could be, something different that required less skill, and I was very impressionable at that. And so I couldn't afford college anymore because it was during the 2007, 2008 financial crisis in New York. And I'm sure you all watched the New York markets tumble and crash. So big investment banks like Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns and Enron, these companies were folding and just putting the world in the tailspin with the subprime mortgage crisis and all that. So I was like, I can't fucking afford school anymore. And this is really expensive and this is going to take a really long time. And I'm not passionate about medicine. I'm passionate about people. And so I tried interning in something else, and that was the Obama Fellowship. But when I left Fordham, the school that I was at, I was going through a lot emotionally. I think being in the Bronx at 17, being financially unstable, I just really struggled to find my footing emotionally and just physically. And so I was hungry to take a job. I had been working since I was 14. I remember forging working papers so I could get my first job, just because I was like, I don't ever want to worry about a meal, having a roof over my head, or how I'm going to provide for myself. So the one thing that always remained consistent was my work ethic. And so I kind of had like a mini breakdown in college before I had come to the Obama campaign. And when I got there, certainly it wasn't a cakewalk. I didn't know if I wanted to do politics, but I knew that I understood people and I could communicate with people and have conversations with them. And so a lot of field organizing for any type of politician really starts with one-on-one conversations. And the best part about the Obama campaign, and like one of the things I think a lot of us staffers took pride in, is that people fell in love with, and sorry for the background noise in the airport, but people fell in love with Barack Obama's story. And Barack Obama was very adamant about it being a collective narrative and a collective voice. And so it wasn't just his story that should be significant. It was a story of hardworking Americans everywhere, and having the courage to share that is what made America resilient and great, because at the time we were going through the financial crisis. And so I guess that was kind of one breakdown. And, my dream of being a doctor, as Langston Hughes would say, was a dream deferred for me. In the poem that Langston Hughes talks about, a dream deferred, he says, what happens to a dream? Does it just shrivel up and die? And mine really just kind of took shape in a different form, but it was very painful. It was uncertain, and it was really walking into something, feeling my way through the dark. And when people ask me, what made you stay with Barack Obama, or what kind of drew you to working on the campaign, I was inspired by him wholeheartedly. And I thought his level of pragmatism and leadership was something that would reflect well on the United States, but across the globe, and having that international perspective. But I needed a job too. So I was hungry, and this was like, an internship that turned into a job. And so it was really a means to provide, and working for the government. I had health insurance, I had a retirement plan. I was paying into these things in my 20s, which was hard because at the time people were saying that people in, my generation, millennials, were the lost generation, that we were going to not own homes, and that it was just so a financially precarious situation. And out of that breakdown, so to speak, where I thought that I dropping out of college or not being able to afford something, I thought that was really going to shift my trajectory. And if any of your listeners have ever grown up in a financially uncertain household, one of the biggest fears that it always sticks with you, regardless of whether you have $1 million or £1 million in the bank or not, is that you are one step away from going back. And so that fear just really lit a fire under my behind and made sure, hey, I'm not the smartest in my class. I'm not going to always have all of the answers, but I can outwork these people. I can, and I do have the endurance to run this marathon, because a lot of people look at it as a sprint, if we can just get through the primary election, if we can just get through the general, or if we can just get through this one financial quarter. I really would stay the course from sunup to sundown if I needed to. One of the things that I did, I was 19, but after interning and doing research for them, I helped out her Mrs. Obama's personal aide, and I helped pack up their house. And I know a lot of people would be like, I'm trying to work in, national security or foreign policy or energy, and I'm trying to do something, more high-minded. I would never, stoop to packing up someone's personal belongings or doing the role of being an executive assistant, which, by the way, a lot of executive assistants, if there's any out there listening, who, may go on to being chief of staff, which is a kind of a newer title in the business world, of someone who can manage a whole life. A lot of executive assistants need to run the world, honest to God, because the wherewithal it takes to balance someone's personal schedule, professional life, be mindful of protecting. In American football, there's a position called left tackle. And there was a movie with Sandra Bullock, and it was called The Blind Side. And so when I think of executive assistants, that role really shapes you into protecting your principal or public figure or your company's blind side, meaning you are always going to take the first blow. You are going to be the first person interfacing with the offense, and you are helping to protect. In football, it would be you're helping to protect the quarterback, but you're being mindful of what that person can't necessarily see out of their peripheral vision that could be a threat to them in some way. So credit to all the executive assistants and people who've done menial tasks, because listen, categorizing, the girl's snow globe collection or packing up his movies or books, it was not glamorous by any means, but I don't think I would have a decade-long tenure with them if I wasn't willing to roll up my sleeves and do the work. No task was too too big or small. And then the last, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say it absolutely comes across. I mean, the absolute sheer resilience and the sheer grit. I loved, just to quote you for a moment, the piece about not being necessarily the smartest. And I would also disagree with that actually as well, but not necessarily being the smartest or anything else, but actually being able to outwork others. You can really hear that strength of character and that grit come through when you talked about rising through the ranks and going through those, what could be quite menial but very, very necessary tasks.
Yeah, and you don't have to go into on your first day in the job or in a new role, or if you're a new manager, or if you're even a junior entry level staffer to a new company, you don't have to contribute on the first meeting. In fact, shut up. Don't even contribute on the first meeting. Just observe, and my favorite thing that Oprah Winfrey said, she was like, people ask, like, how did you become such a great interviewer? And she's like, it's because I was a great listener. And I really do think in order to be a great leader or a great manager or just a great employee or great even student, you have to constantly feed your appetite for curiosity, take notice of the things around you, and really listen to the things that people are not saying just as much as you listen to the things that they are talking about. Because sometimes you'll find the best way for you to contribute, and your contribution will be authentic because you've really taken the time to learn the infrastructure and see what already exists. And then maybe something speaks to you and plays to your skill set of how to add to that organization or person.
Would there be anything at all that you would change from your career to date? And if you were to go back and give the young Desiree advice way back when, or say a decade ago, what would you have said to your younger self? And is there any advice that you would give to others who are out there now who are, maybe even struggling or having a tough time trying to find themselves, trying to really make it up there in their personal career?
I would say that mental health, to my younger self, I would say mental health is real. And it's okay if you break down. It's not necessarily rebuilding yourself. It's just about nurturing the person that exists and working with your handicaps in some ways. And I struggled with depression and anxiety a lot growing up, but I did not know, I didn't have the language to communicate that. And it wasn't familiar in my household. And especially growing up as, being a minority and sometimes being women, people expect you to be resilient and tolerant. And you are responsible for either, running a household, rearing children, balancing a job. Because, if we think about the post-women movement and the suffrage movement, not only do you have the right to vote, but now if you want to be treated equally, you're going out and you're doing these jobs that were typically reserved for men. But within all of that, I would say that it's okay to be vulnerable and it's okay to be fragile, because I do wonder if I had gotten treatment for those things earlier on, I wouldn't have been conditioned in certain ways. So imposter syndrome, for example, is very real, and I suffer from it all the time. And for any of your viewers or listeners who don't know, it's like walking into somewhere and it's like, what? I'm just someone basic. Like, I do not, deserve to be here. Or like, what if they find out that like I forgot to do this, and just really undervaluing yourself and your own credibility. And I think sometimes with female leadership, we can be our own worst enemy because we're so afraid of like, let me be nice when I deliver this news, because we're worried about how we're going to be perceived. And we know that there's a double standard and want to be liked. But I think that now I'm trying to unlearn some of the things that I held on to, that when I was younger, I thought, like, all right, like this is an unstable situation, or this person, might be a negative manager or extremely toxic or extremely hard on you. It's okay. Endure it because it will pay off. And in some cases, it does. But bad behavior now especially even in the Me Too movement era, like doesn't get rewarded. And, there are other ways to report if there is, if you're in a toxic environment and you don't have to tolerate certain things. And it doesn't, because those things eventually, wither away at you and whittle away at your core. So by the time you've endured all of this, you're like, you feel like, I don't know if I can do this on my own. And, even after my time with the Obamas and the administration, I really questioned, because so many people knew me or were so impressed by me being associated or affiliated with the Obamas. But I'm like, look, I never lose fucking sleep over how successful the Obamas will be post presidency. I cannot worry about anyone, crapping on his legacy, because the work speaks for itself, even if people may be late to, appreciating it or understanding it. What I need to be worried about is myself and my, mental and emotional well-being. And I really wanted to make sure that whenever I work with a client, you have to want to work with me for me. And there will be no call from Barack Obama to say, oh, she's great. I really wanted to stand alone and just have my work speak for itself and really build a portfolio outside of being affiliated with, such a great brand. And I guess you could say company for so long. And I'm sure some of your listeners who may work with Amazon or L'Oreal, or they could work with, Kensington Palace, they know it looks good on the resume, but at the end of the day, when you get into a job, they want to see that you are capable of maintaining that. They want to see if the hype, if you live up to the hype, then they want to see if you're capable of maintaining it yourself. If I was my younger self, it would be, don't be afraid to treat the person and not just what you think you're programmed to do. Like, it's okay to be a person.
That's fantastic advice. And, we would absolutely love to work with you when we come to the States, and perhaps even before then as well. It's funny that you mentioned Kensington Palace, because we're actually going to Kensington Palace in June for our first advisory meeting.
They're great people.
You'd be completely welcome to come. I'll send you the details if you want to come across. But we would be delighted to work with you when we come over to the States. Obviously, we're doing our DIAL Global Summit, which stands for Diverse, Inclusive, Aspirational Leaders Summit, over in New York in September or November 2020. So really, really excited about that. And just to touch on a couple of your points, but I really love those pieces of advice. And I'd love to be able to also summarize that just for some of our listeners, some of the things that Desiree has kindly talked us through. I love the piece about being a great listener and feeding your appetite for curiosity. For anyone who is tuning in today and who is perhaps worrying a little bit or having a bit of a rough time, really make sure that you're looking after your mental and emotional well-being, because that is absolutely critical to your future success and to your personal well-being as well. I love the fact, Desiree, that you spoke through some of your struggles with anxiety and depression. I can completely relate to that, because I've suffered from the same myself. And I think it's really tough when you're younger, because you don't necessarily want to speak out. Actually, as you said, it's okay to be fragile. It's okay to be vulnerable. A lot of us feel imposter syndrome and, often feel that we don't deserve to be here. So for those who have and can relate to this, don't be your own worst enemy. Have the confidence. I think Desiree's story today has just been so unbelievably moving. And
just having the confidence to ask for help, that's for a lot of people huge. And I will say there's no quick fix to dealing with mental health issues, but it is not a disqualifier. And, actually, ironically, when I suffered from my first bout of depression, one of the things that helped me out of it, and you're going to think this is crazy, because here was this little Black girl in Buffalo, New York, going to a Barnes & Noble, treating it like a library, which is a bookstore here. You all don't have it in the UK, treating it like a library. And I picked up Winston Churchill's autobiography. And I can't tell you how much it changed my life, listening to his old speeches and just reading about him and how he struggled with depression. I know sounds absolutely crazy. But
it doesn't sound crazy at all.
Me.
I don't think it sounds crazy at all.
Yeah.
And, I'm such
and by the way,
Go on.
Yeah, no. By the way, I love the UK for that reason, because I felt like, the people in the UK not only understood my cheeky, sharp sense of humor, but you all have some of the best leaders. And I'm not saying that to flatter. I mean, I really admired British history and a lot of the leaders and historical figures that have come out of there. And even like an entrepreneur like Richard Branson, who I know might be an acquired taste for some people.
I
but
love
trust
Richard
and believe.
Branson. I'm reading his book at the moment.
Yeah.
It's absolutely fantastic.
Oh,
He
good.
tells it with such wit and humor. It's brilliant. I've got it on Audible. His Like a Virgin book. It's brilliant.
What I love that you
at business
Audible.
School. Yeah. Oh, it's so great. I mean, I'm such a book geek, and it sounds like you're absolutely the same. I think if I'm not reading something, I'm listening to something, or if I'm going down the gym, put an Audible on and kind of multitask and learn whilst getting healthy.
Yeah, and it's funny because things like Audible, as well as other like techniques, like some people might be workout gurus, and like that might be the way that they de-stress and unplug. For me, it's very honest when I say I like trap music with my yoga. It like speaks to both sides of me that wants to have this Zen minimalist and clean way of thinking, but it also speaks to the other side of me that like has a lot of aggression that wants to be released in some way. But I'm happy to answer any other questions. I've got about like five more minutes, but I can't say how much I appreciate the opportunity to even come on and share my story. And I know I'm not the most organized or orator when I speak, especially if there's other things going on around me. But if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer.
Desiree, it's been an absolute honor having you on the show. Absolute honor. I really mean that. I've been so excited about I've been so excited about speaking with you and also meeting you. And genuinely, when we come off our call, off the podcast today, I'm going to send you an invitation to Kensington Palace, because we're going around to look at Victoria and the Crown. It's a private viewing. And I would absolutely love to do some work together with you on Dial.
Yeah.
Dates as well. So definitely watch this space, and all of our listeners, watch this space. This will not be the last you hear of the incredible Desiree Barnes. It's been an absolute true pleasure having you, and I really appreciate you sharing some of the really kind of emotional and gritty pieces of your story as well, which I'm sure will resonate with many of our listeners. And I should say, just before you go, we wave goodbye to you off on your flight, I will say, if anyone would like to get in touch with Desiree, please do reach out. I'm going to put all of the summary from today's show onto the show notes. You can also get in touch with Desiree directly, either on LinkedIn, or you can catch her on Instagram as well, which I believe is at DN Barnes, which is spelled at DNBARNES, but I will put all of that on the show notes. So just to say a big thank you again. Thank you so much, Desiree, for being with us. And my name is Leila Mackenzie. You've been listening to the podcast show with you every week due to popular demand. This is Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the podcast. And you've been listening today to Desiree Barnes, the former communications and public engagement strategist to former President Barack Obama, now running her own very, very successful company. So thank you very much again, Desiree. And I will look forward to speaking with you again very soon.
Yes, same. And, many good vibes to all of your listeners. Please don't hesitate to reach out. I know the title is Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, and I really appreciate that you all across the pond see the importance in equity and having diverse and inclusive leadership. And that's just not, related to ethnicity or gender, that could be sexual orientation, or just having diversity in thought, because groupthink can be dangerous. So keep your minds open over there in the pond, and don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything.
So well summarized. Thanks so much, Desiree. And see you all again next time.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms. Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.